Hi, my name is Leslie Moika, and I wear two deeply connected hats. One as a mother of six, and the other as a certified medical assistant at Glacier Pediatrics here in Juneau, Alaska. These roles have given me a front row seat to the incredible, complex journey of child development. I have seen the science of growth play out, not just in textbooks, but through lived experiences of my own children and the patients I see. In this slideshow, I'll walk you through the stages of development from conception to adolescence, blending theory with real-life insight. Together, we'll explore how children grow physically, emotionally, socially, and cognitively, shaped by their biology, environment, and experiences. The prenatal stage, though unseen, is one of the most foundational periods of human development. It is during this time that nearly every major organ system forms and the child's physical and neurological blueprint begins taking shape. As a mother of six, I have firsthand experience on how each pregnancy felt different, not only physically, but also emotionally. I recall experiencing high levels of stress due to an unforeseen life-changing event. And looking back, I truly do believe it affected my child's early temperament, which does align with Feldman's point that the prenatal environment influences postnatal development. Prenatal development is divided into three stages: the germinal, embryonic, and the fetal periods. Feldman emphasizes how vulnerable the embryonic stage is to teratogens. Substances like alcohol, certain medications, or even environmental toxins can interfere with that development. While I may not discuss pregnancy clinically as a CMA, I regularly observe developmental outcomes that might be connected to what occurred during the prenatal stage. For example, children that are born prematurely often face additional developmental screenings in our office. And we monitor that growth, reflexes, and milestones closely. And this is just a reminder of how critical those early 9 months are to a child's later growth. Infancy is a stage of rapid growth. Physically, infants triple their birth weight and their motor skills emerge, and the foundation for language and attachment are laid. I ran an in-home daycare during the pandemic, and during this time I had an infant daughter, and I can say without a doubt that the time that I spent with her at home really formed a deep attachment, and it kind of reminds me of Bowlby's attachment theory. Her secure attachment gave her the confidence to explore new environments when we were able to. And there was a sense of security knowing that I was always nearby. In the pediatric clinic, we monitor developmental milestones using screening testings. And if a baby isn't babbling or making eye contact by a certain age, it could indicate a delay. These small signs, when caught early, can change a child's development path. Temperament also begins to show in infancy. Feldman highlights how traits such as emotional intensity and adaptability tend to remain stable over time. I have a child who is actually incredibly sensitive to noise from infancy, and this was a trait that they carried into their school years, and it really has shaped how they respond to stress and large crowds and transitions. Early childhood is full of magic and challenges. During this stage, children develop a symbolic thinking, language skills, and a growing sense of independence. Piaget describes this period as the pre-operational stage, where kids use imagination and begin forming mental representations, but can struggle with logical operations. This is one of my favorite developmental stages. I love watching my daughter have imagination and forming relationships and just kind of getting a sense of self. However, I do notice that during this stage, we do have frequent arguments with siblings, and it's not necessarily out of malice, but usually because they really can't grasp others' perspectives. And I feel like this is a classic example of egocentrism. Socially, this is when children begin to build friendships and experiment with emotional expression. As for me, a child growing up in poverty, I didn't have access to early learning programs like preschool, and we really didn't have like an educational things in our home. And looking back, I can see how, this affected my school readiness, and it not due to the lack of ability, but due to the lack of access of resources. Fieldman notes that early cognitive development can be significantly shaped by socioeconomic factors, and limited stimulation can delay language, emotional regulation, and learning skills. In the clinic, unfortunately, I do see similar disparities. Some children arrive at age 4, never have read a book. And it's not because their families don't care. It's just because they're working so hard right now just to survive. I believe that this grasps the highlight of a critical need for early accessible support and education for all families. During middle childhood, developmental growth becomes more structured. Piaget calls this concrete operational stage. And this is where children begin thinking logically about concrete events and mastering concepts like conservation and classification. An example of this would be my son really struggles with math, and he's 10 years old, and he's struggled for most of the year, but here recently he's really grasped the concept of fractions, and seeing this light bulb go off in his head and really, feeling like he could master this, it gave him a sense of pride. And I felt like that aligns with Erikson's psychosocial stage of industry versus inferiority. This success that he's having in school is leading to a growing sense of competence, and while when he was experiencing that repeated failure, it was really damaging his self-esteem. For me, growing up, I remember how poverty shaped my experience during this stage. And it was difficult because we weren't able to afford things like school supplies or even clean clothes, or, food was scarce. And it's really affected how I felt about myself. And unfortunately, this also affected how others treated me. I was bullied. Fieldman highlights how lower socioeconomic status can be linked with stress, food insecurity, reduced access to enriching experiences. These are things I lived and really did have an impact on my emotional, cognitive, and social growth. As a CMA in the pediatric clinic, I do see children from similar backgrounds, and they do struggle with behavioral or academic concerns. And it doesn't mean that they're lazy or difficult. It just can mean that they're overwhelmed by this stress or instability or unmet needs. And recognizing this can help us support them more compassionately and effectively, and help them get the resources they need to be successful and feeling good about themselves. Adolescence. This is one of the most transformative stages of development, and often the most emotional, turbulent. Teenagers go through puberty and experience major brain development and face intense social pressures. Erikson's stage of identity versus role confusion defines this period as a teen asks, "Who am I and where do I fit in?" As a parent, I have seen my teens really grapple with their identity and, changing friend groups, questioning beliefs, and unfortunately, even testing limits. And my children often struggle with peer conflict and self-worth, and their mood swings and withdrawal and increased sensitivity can really be difficult to navigate sometimes. As Fieldman notes, emotional intensity in adolescence is tied to both hormonal changes and undeveloped impulse control. As a CMA, I work with adolescents who deal with anxiety, depression, body image issues, and many face the pressure to perform socially and academically. And I believe that this is where counseling, family communication, and peer support can make all of the difference. Adolescents may appear to be independent, but they still need strong emotional anchors. What I've learned most across all these stages is that child development is highly individualized. Each child's temperament, environment, and culture plays a role in how they grow. Fieldman emphasizes the importance of considering both universal and context-specific aspects of development. In both my home and at the pediatric clinic, I have seen what works for one child might not work for another. Some children thrive in structure, while others need some flexibility. Some patients benefit from hands-on learning, and some want behavioral plans tailored to their specific needs. Culturally responsive care and individualized attention are not just best practice. They are essential. Reflecting on this journey, I've come to deeply respect the complexity of human development. Theories from Piaget, Erikson, Bowlby, and others have provided the framework, but the real-life experiences have filled in the details. For instance, growing up poor has made me more aware of what many children go through silently, from shame around basic needs to chronic stress that affects sleep, learning, and behavior. Fieldman's coverage of environmental risk factors and socioeconomic influences on development helped me better understand my own story, but it's also shaped how I show up for my children and the children I care for today, and has really what has encouraged me to explore child psychology. Watching children grow, both my children and those I serve, remind me that development isn't linear. It's filled with setbacks, leaps, pauses, and moments of transformation. Children aren't just growing bodies, they're growing identities, worldviews, and emotional strength. And as Fieldman writes, development is influenced by a dynamic interaction of heredity and environment, biology and experience, and being part of that journey as a mother and a medical professional is both a challenge and a gift. Thank you for joining me on this reflection of child development through a lens of care, compassion, and lived experience.